Good evening, lover of dark stories. Did you come for the story? Or did the story come for you? If you're here, it's because you enjoy the kind of tales that linger in your mind, the ones that haunt you for days. And tonight, I have a story that will stay with you far longer than you imagine. You probably wouldn't believe it, but what I'm about to tell you is something many people in a small town in Pennsylvania wish they could forget. But stories like this aren't so easily erased. Now that you're here, I hope you're comfortable. Put on your headphones, light a candle, and pay close attention. I won't bother interrupting this tale with a bunch of ads. So, without further delay, let's begin. Tonight's story is about a man who loved his wife too much. A love so deep it crossed the boundaries of what's normal, plunging into a dark and macabre abyss. It's not easy to talk about this, but I think you deserve to know. I always believed that love, in its purest form, was something liberating, something that lifted us. But for James, his love for his wife, Emily, became a prison. And the worst part? He didn't know how to escape it. How do you break free from something that consumes you completely? How? He didn't know. So he made a decision. One that changed everything. James had been married to Emily for a few years. She was a fascinating woman. Beautiful, intelligent, with that kind of smile that made everything around her seem brighter. But as time went on, he grew more and more insecure. As if, with each passing day, she was becoming more distant. As if, deep down, she was slowly pulling away from him. And that terrified him. He didn't want to lose Emily. He couldn't lose her. In the small town where they lived, people often talked about them, about their love. Some even said it was the kind of love you only see in movies, the kind that never fades. But James didn't believe in that. He saw his wife differently. He saw her as an object, something he needed to protect, to control. Sometimes I wonder, what happened to James to make him think that way? Was he always like that? Or was it something that grew over time? Something that couldn't be stopped? But the most disturbing thing? He wasn't wrong. Emily was starting to drift away from him. Not because she loved him less, but because she began to realize how possessive he was. How he was becoming a shadow in her life, always watching, always hovering, always listening. And instead of facing that truth, James did the unthinkable. He had an idea, one that, to him, felt like the only solution. He started researching, obsessively studying, how to preserve human bodies, how to preserve something forever. He believed that if he could somehow capture Emily's essence, she would never leave. She would be his for all time. And that's when the twisted idea took form. He became obsessed with immortalizing his wife. Not physically, no, but in a way far more disturbing. He wanted to turn her into something that could never walk away. He wanted to turn her into a wax doll. I know what you're thinking. That's impossible. But you see, sometimes when the fear of losing someone we love grows bigger than our sanity, we make decisions that feel inevitable. He searched for weeks. Eventually, he found a wax artisan, someone with an uncanny ability to craft replicas so lifelike, so disturbingly real, that it became nearly impossible to tell the difference between them and the living. It was a complex process, far more difficult than James had imagined. But for him, there was no other way. James didn't care. Nothing else mattered. He began experimenting with wax, trying to create something perfect, something that could capture Emily's very essence, in a way that she could never leave him. It wasn't love anymore. It was obsession. And that obsession grew, consuming his mind, day by day. Each passing moment pulled him further from reality. He wasn't living in the present anymore. He was somewhere else, lost in his thoughts, lost in the belief that he could keep Emily forever. But, as you can probably guess, nothing ever goes as planned, does it? Not when it comes from something this twisted. What began as an innocent idea, a desperate thought inside a fragile mind, quickly became something much, much darker. Now let me ask you, do you believe in stories like this? Do you think something like this could actually happen? Or do you think I'm exaggerating, making it all up just to hold your attention? Maybe I am. Maybe not. I honestly don't know anymore. But what I do know is that James moved forward with his plan, with a clarity so disturbing and a purpose so warped that later the whole town would ask, how did no one notice? How did no one see what was happening? And maybe Maybe you're starting to ask the same thing. The strangest part is that, at the time, no one really knew what James was doing. He had withdrawn from everyone. He no longer spoke to the neighbors, avoided any kind of interaction. He spent hours in his office, studying, creating, molding. Emily was home, detached, absorbed in her routine, lost in her own thoughts. She felt the weight of James's presence, but couldn't understand what was happening to him. Something was different, but she didn't know what. And then, one day, everything changed. Emily came home and found James in his office, the room darker than usual. The curtains were drawn, and there was a strange smell in the air, something she couldn't quite identify. It made her wrinkle her nose. The lamp flickered, like it was fighting to stay lit. She approached the door and opened it slowly, curiosity tingling her spine. James was there, hunched over a table covered in melted wax. The smell came from it, thick, sweet, and heavy in the air. She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. He, however, didn't seem to notice. He was absorbed in his work, his hands moving with precision, but in a mechanical, almost robotic way. When Emily stepped inside, he looked up, and the expression on his face made her blood run cold. It was a blank stare, lifeless, like he was trapped somewhere she couldn't reach. He didn't smile. He didn't say a word. He just went back to working. But she knew something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Emily tried to question him, to ask what he was doing, but the words wouldn't come. She began backing away slowly, her body trembling with a growing sense of unease. But before she could slip out the door, James spoke, his voice soft but urgent. You need to see this, he said, with a disturbingly calm tone. She turned back slowly. What had James done? She stepped toward the table, hesitant, and what she saw nearly made her collapse to the floor. What stood before her was no longer the reality she knew. It was a replica of herself. But not just any replica. It was a twisted reflection of Emily. The face looked nearly perfect, but there was something wrong with the eyes. They were empty. The hair, sculpted with eerie precision, didn't move, didn't shine the way hers did. And the skin? The skin was stiff, cold like the wax of a candle that had burned too long. James, she whispered, her voice faltering. What is this? He looked at her absent-mindedly, as if she were just a shadow in the room. I didn't want to lose you, Emily. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't live without you. So I decided to preserve you. Forever. That way, you'll never leave me. James's words echoed in her mind, but they felt distant, like he was speaking about someone else. Someone she didn't recognize. Fear began to rise inside her, but she didn't know how to react. What was she supposed to do? How do you step away from someone who, until that moment, seemed to love you more than anything? But that look, his empty, emotionless gaze, made her realize something she had never seen before. James didn't love her. Not in the way she had thought. He possessed her. He wanted her, but not as a person. He wanted her as an object. Something he could control. Something he could keep under his watch, never free. She tried to step back, tried to run. But he grabbed her, his fingers weak, yet firm enough to stop her from fleeing. He muttered something she couldn't quite hear, but his gaze was locked onto the wax figure, as if in a trance. You don't understand, Emily. I just wanted you to always be here. Always. Her voice caught in her throat. How could he do this to her? How could he turn her into something so grotesque? Something lifeless. Something that couldn't feel, couldn't move. This was the only way he could keep her. He didn't know what else to do. And in that moment, staring at the wax version of his wife, something more statue than woman, he felt a dark satisfaction. A twisted comfort that filled the void inside. Him. After all, she could never leave him. Not ever again. But deep down, James knew there was a price. He felt it, even if he didn't want to admit it. Something was wrong. And like all acts of obsession, it came with consequences. The nights dragged on. James spent more time with the wax figure than with the real Emily. He spoke to it, as if it were alive. Talked about their day. About the things they used to do together. But of course, Emily didn't respond. She was frozen, still, perfect, but hollow. And the longer he stayed near it, the more he began to sense something. Off in the house, something was watching. Something that hadn't been there before. Something beyond his control. He felt a presence. A pressure. As though someone or something was waiting. Watching. Prepared something terrible. That night, James awoke in a panic. Something had stirred him. Something was calling him. He felt Emily's presence in the house. But it wasn't her. Not anymore. He heard a low noise coming from the office. His breathing grew heavy. It couldn't be, but he had to check. What he found there. I can't even describe it fully. It wasn't the wife he loved. It wasn't the wax figure. It was something else. Something worse. James stepped into the office, his steps slow and heavy, as if the weight of his own actions was pushing him forward. The room was immersed in a disturbing silence, broken only by the faint hum of a small fan in the corner. Shadows stretched across the walls, distorted by the dim, flickering light. He looked toward the desk, where Emily's wax figure had been, but it was gone. In the place where the replica should have been, was only a pile of melted wax and shattered fragments, as if something had split in half. The scent, once thick and sweet, had turned unbearably strong and sour, like the very essence of death clinging to the air. James took a step toward the desk, his heart pounding in his chest. A cold shiver ran down his spine, but he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. Where was the doll? Where was Emily? Then he heard it, a low sound, almost inaudible, coming from the corner of the room. A whisper. Or maybe it wasn't a whisper. Maybe it was the wind. Or maybe it was something much worse. James. His name was spoken with a chilling softness, as if from somewhere deep and distant. He froze in place. His eyes widened, and his mind refused to accept what it had heard. He knew Emily couldn't be there. She couldn't be. But that whisper, it felt so real, like it was coming from right beside him. He turned, his body trembling now, trying to locate the source of the sound. But there was nothing. Just the shadows dancing on the walls, and the weak glow of the lamp. He stepped toward the doorway, and looked down the hall. Nothing. No one. Then again. James. This time the voice was clearer, unmistakable. He wasn't imagining it. He knew it was real. Or at least, it felt real. He began questioning his sanity. Was he hallucinating? Losing control? Before he could react, the office door slammed shut behind him, and he spun around, heart racing. The wax that had once been spread across the desk began to move, slowly, as if coming to life. James couldn't believe what he was seeing. The wax, once melted and broken, was gathering itself, reshaping, and something was emerging from that formless mass. A figure, slowly rising before him. No, James murmured, his lips trembling. He couldn't believe it. But there, before his eyes, Emily's figure was forming again. Not the Emily he remembered, something darker. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless, and her skin looked translucent, almost glass-like. Emily? James asked, barely able to speak. The wax figure, now nearly complete, shook her head slowly. She wasn't Emily. She was just an imitation, a twisted version. A wave of panic surged in James's chest. He tried to step back, but his legs wouldn't move. He was paralyzed, trapped somewhere between reality and nightmare. You left James. The figure whispered, Emily's voice echoing in a warped, spectral tone. You killed me. You killed what was left of me. What was happening? How was this possible? James looked around, trying to ground himself, to understand what was happening to his mind. Then, suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him, and his heart nearly stopped. He turned quickly, only to see a shadow shift in the corner of the office. And that's when he saw her, the real Emily. She stood in the shadows, her eyes locked on him. Her face was pale, something clearly wrong. But her eyes were alive. And in that moment, James knew. She knew what he had done. She knew what he had tried to do to her. And she was not pleased. James, she whispered, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. What did you do to me? What did you do? A shiver ran down James's spine. He wanted to run, to escape, but his legs wouldn't move. He was trapped, as if the house itself had taken hold of him, the walls slowly closing in, suffocating him. The wax figure, now standing, turned to face him. Her movements were slow and heavy, as though pulled by something beyond James's control. She stepped toward him, her empty, soulless gaze locked onto him with an intensity that made his mind scream for release. You'll never be rid of me, James, she said, her her voice cracking in a way that sounded painful. "You can't run from who you've become. You can't run from what you've done." James's eyes filled with tears. He didn't know what was happening. He couldn't explain any of it. The room began to spin around him, and the shadows stretched and warped, taking on strange, grotesque forms. He heard Emily's breath behind him, slow, sharp, and when he turned, her eyes pierced through him. He felt like she could see everything inside him. "Emily, please," he begged, voice shaking. "Forgive me. I only wanted." But she didn't let him finish. With one swift step forward, her ice-cold hands touched his face. The sensation was freezing, like his very soul was being pulled from his body. He had no more strength to fight that everything was going dark. He tried to scream, but no sound came. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was being consumed. Slowly, by something he didn't understand, something he could never control. And then, with one final breath, James surrendered to the void, to the darkness, to what he had created. The void was absolute. James didn't know if he was awake or dreaming. He no longer knew what was real. The shadows around him seemed to be closing in, becoming a mass of deep, formless, endless darkness. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. He was completely paralyzed. There was no sound, no light, only the absolute void. But then, he heard something. A voice, his own voice, distorted, echoing through the abyss. "You can't run from me, James. Never." He felt a presence. A powerful, overwhelming presence surrounding him. He tried to scream, but the words died before they even left his lips. Fear consumed him, clutched his throat. That feeling of being watched overtook him, and with it, the realization that something was there with him. Something he had created. Something that now owned him. Images began to return, hazy and fragmented. The last thing he remembered was the wax figure of Emily, but now it felt like she was everywhere, all around him. Her face expressionless, her eyes locked onto him with a coldness that felt almost physical. He tried to escape, but his legs wouldn't move as if the floor beneath him had turned to cement, holding him in place. "You abandoned me, James. You left me before I even became this." He felt a touch on his shoulder and slowly turned, but no one was there. Just more darkness. But he knew he wasn't alone. Something was watching him, waiting for him, waiting for the last piece of his spirit. The feeling was unbearable. "I should have never done this. I should have let you go, Emily," he murmured, his voice nearly inaudible, broken with anguish. And as he said it, it felt like an invisible weight had been placed on his chest, like someone's hands were gripping his soul, squeezing every piece of his being until he couldn't breathe anymore. This was punishment. Punishment for trying to imprison someone who, by love's very nature, could never be contained. He had turned her into something that wasn't her anymore. He could no longer tell what was real. Emily was there, but she wasn't. The wax figure remained, but twisted, lifeless, soulless. And he, James, was being consumed by that mistake. He knew it now. He knew what he had done couldn't be undone. He had erased Emily in a way that had no return dot, and now she was taking him with her, but not out of revenge. Not in the way he thought. The worst part was, she didn't need him anymore. She no longer needed his obsession. She had become more than he could ever comprehend. More than the figure he had crafted. She was beyond him now. "I needed you, Emily," he whispered, the words broken by sobs of despair. But the answer, never, came. Not anymore. The void surrounded him, and he finally understood that he was trapped. Not in the house. Not in the world. He was trapped in what he had created. The wax. The obsession. The void. Then, without warning, the darkness began to lift, slowly, like a curtain being drawn. James blinked, his eyes trying to adjust to a light, now beginning to pierce through the shadows. And what he saw, he hadn't expected. He was back in his house. Not the office. Not the place where it all had happened. The living room. But still, something felt wrong. Something he couldn't quite place. Something out of place. He looked around, trying to understand. And as his eyes scanned the room, his stomach twisted. He saw Emily again. But it wasn't the wax figure. It wasn't the Emily he had loved. It was something else entirely. The figure stood upright, staring at him with an empty expression. And when their eyes met, a chill ran through his entire body. Those weren't Emily's words. But somehow, he felt like she was speaking to him. "Why watching him from somewhere far, faceless, formless. The image began to fade slowly, as if unraveling. But her words echoed in James's mind. "You can't find me anymore, James. I'm already beyond you." Her voice faded, until it vanished completely. The room was silent now. Emily's image was gone. But James couldn't understand what had happened. Was he dreaming? Or was something still there? Something he couldn't see? And then he felt it. A gentle touch on his shoulder. The sensation was icy, like touching the surface of glass. Cold, smooth, impenetrable. He spun around quickly, but no one was there. Nothing but darkness, Dot. And in the moment he blinked, he knew. This story wasn't over for him, Dot. It would never be over. The worst part wasn't what he'd done to Emily. It wasn't what she had become. The worst part, truly, was what he had become. He had lost himself forever, trapped in his own personal hell. The silence that filled the room was as oppressive as the darkness itself. James looked around, his eyes slowly adjusting to a light that seemed to come from nowhere. But the sensation of being watched was so intense, he could barely breathe. He could feel her presence, Emily, but she wasn't there physically. The feeling was even more disturbing, as if she were somewhere close, watching, waiting. He knew his mind was crumbling, but that didn't change the fact that he could still feel her. James could no longer distinguish what was real and what wasn't. The air was thick, heavy with tension, and he felt trapped. But trapped by what? What exactly was keeping him inside those walls? He wanted to scream, but his voice seemed to have vanished. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. The void around him swallowed everything, but he couldn't ignore it. He knew he was somewhere between reality and hell. There was something beyond his control, something he couldn't understand. He had made an irreversible mistake, and now he was paying the price. But what else could he do? How could he free himself from the invisible prison he had created? The room felt like it was closing in, the corners darkening, while the shadows stretched, turning into shapes he couldn't recognize. He could no longer escape the images that haunted him. The wax figure, Emily's presence, all of it pursued him like a living nightmare. The only thing he knew for sure was that there was no way out. Suddenly, he heard a sound. A soft knock at the door, so gentle, it almost seemed normal. But hearing it made something inside him go cold. He stared at the door, his mind swirling with fear and doubt. Who could it be? He wasn't expecting anyone anymore. But as if pulled by an invisible force, he stood up slowly, his body heavy, his muscles aching. The door was slightly ajar. Hallway light casting faint shadows across the floor. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The knock had been barely audible, like someone or something was trying to enter unnoticed. He reached out, his breathing heavy, fingers inching toward the doorknob. When he turned it and pushed the door open, his stomach twisted. What he saw was impossible. Emily was there. But not the Emily he once knew. Not the woman he loved. She was pale, her eyes lifeless, as if her essence had been completely drained. And yet, something about her was familiar. Something that cut through him with unbearable pain. She stood still, unmoving, like a statue. But as he looked closer, he realized she was staring at him. Her eyes were empty, yes, but they were locked onto him, like he was the only thing she still recognized. He didn't know what to do. His vision blurred with tears, and he could barely stand. What had he done to her? What had he done to the only thing he ever truly loved? "Emily, please," he whispered, but his voice sounded distant, like it didn't belong to him. He didn't know if he was apologizing or begging for forgiveness. Fear and guilt consumed him, and for a brief moment, he almost believed it was all an illusion. A nightmare, but the tears were real. The pain was real. She didn't respond. She never would. Not anymore. She was there, but no longer with him. She would never come back. James knew that now. Knew that she had left, both physically and emotionally. The air around him grew heavier. He began to step back slowly, a crushing weight on his chest. What had he done? How had he gone this far? He had been blinded by the fear of losing her, and now he had lost everything. There was no going back, but just as he stepped away, something made him stop. A strange sensation. A feeling that there was something else in that room. Something that shouldn't be there. He turned quickly, and that's when terror consumed him. In the corner of the room, where nothing had been, there was a shadow. craftsman's face was twisted, almost unrecognizable, as if the very wax he once molded had taken over his flesh. He stood there, still, his presence filling the room with dread. "You've done something far worse than you realize, James," the craftsman whispered, his voice cold and hollow. "It's not just Emily who's trapped. You are too." A wave of panic rose inside James. He tried to speak, but his mouth went dry. The words died in his throat. What had he done? What was the craftsman trying to say? He was lost, not just in his mind, but in a game he couldn't understand. The craftsman stepped forward slowly, his footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. James tried to back away, but his legs were weak. His strength was gone. He was trapped. Trapped in a place he had built himself. Trapped in the obsession that now consumed him. "You'll never escape, James," the craftsman said with a strange smile. "Not Emily, not you." And with those words, James knew deep in his heart that he was truly lost. He hadn't just lost Emily, he had lost his soul. Condemned to wander forever in the shadows, tangled in the web he had spun with his own hands. The feeling of being trapped grew stronger. James felt the world around him collapse, as if the very walls of the house were closing in on him. The craftsman was there, his threatening presence filling the space. But it wasn't just the craftsman. Something else was at play now, something James couldn't fully grasp. He had the distinct sense that the house itself, or rather, what he had done to his wife, to Emily, was coming alive, and not in a way he could control. You don't understand, James," the craftsman continued, his voice low and cold, like a blade of ice scraping against skin. "You can't mold a person like wax. You tampered with something far beyond your control." James tried to react, but his body wouldn't obey. The words were stuck in his throat, and a wave of paralysis overtook him. He wanted to scream too, run from this nightmare, but he knew he couldn't. He had gone too far, and now there was no way back. He had crossed a line, and it was consuming him. "I just wanted her to stay with me," he murmured, almost to himself, as if trying to justify what he had done. "I couldn't lose her. I couldn't." The craftsman looked at him with a strange, almost cruel smile. "You lost her long before you turned her into wax. You lost her when you stopped letting her be free. Now both of you are trapped here, and there's nothing left to do." The air grew heavier, James's breathing more labored. He was beginning to understand, but at the same time, he couldn't fully comprehend. It felt like the house was alive, like the walls were breathing, moving. The scent of wax in the air was growing stronger, and he could see the shadows on the walls stretching, reaching out to take shape. It was as if the house itself was claiming him. The craftsman moved closer, and with each step, James's fear deepened. He wanted to back away, to run far from there, but he couldn't. He was trapped. Trapped in what he had created. "So now what, James?" the craftsman whispered. "Will you live with what you've done? Will you live with the wax? With the loss?" The craftsman's words echoed in James's mind, and it felt as though his sanity was eroding, disintegrating. He didn't know what was more terrifying, the fact that he was already lost, or the fact that he had no idea how to escape. He was caught in a web of fear and obsession, and the only way out seemed to be accepting there was no way out. But he didn't want to accept that. He COULDN single quotes T. James turned, desperate to find a way out of that room. But what he saw froze him in place. Emily was there again. Not the wax figure. Not the wife he once loved. But something distorted. Something staring at him with hollow, lifeless eyes. It was like she was there, and yet not. She was no longer Emily. She was a shadow of what she once was. She slowly raised her hand, and James felt a chill race down his spine. He wanted to move, to back away, but his feet were glued to the floor. There was no escape. He was trapped in a nightmare, and the only thing left was the overwhelming sense that what he had created was now devouring him. "James," Emily's voice called out, but it was warped, empty. "You killed me. You killed what was left of me." He couldn't respond. He didn't know what to do. He had destroyed everything. He had destroyed the only thing he ever truly loved. And now, she stood before him, but she wasn't her dot. She was the shadow of what he had done. "You love me, don't you, James?" the figure asked, but her voice disintegrated in the air, as if made of wax, as if born of the darkness itself. "You love what I was, tried to get away, the more he felt the wax clinging to him, holding him down, consuming him. "You made me a slave to your fear, James," Emily's figure said, now fully formed before him. "And now, you will be mine." James felt his mind fracture, as if his sanity were crumbling. He could no longer tell what was real, what was nightmare. It felt as though the wax was moving inside him, as if he was becoming part of what he had created. The pain was unbearable. He didn't know where he was, who he was. All he knew was that he was lost, trapped in a cycle of obsession and guilt. And in the end, he realized the most terrifying thing of all, It wasn't Emily, It wasn't the craftsman. The most terrifying part was that he would never be free. He would never escape what he had done. He was imprisoned in his own creation, forever. Time seemed to have stopped. James had no idea how long it had passed, but the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle consumed him in a way he couldn't control. He could no longer tell the difference between reality and the madness overtaking his mind. The house, or perhaps what it had become, felt like it was stretching beyond the physical, as if it were alive, pulsing with a kind of dark energy. Every corner, every shadow seemed to be watching, waiting. Emily's figure remained there, static and cold, her empty gaze fixed on James. He couldn't bear the sight anymore. He wanted to scream, to run far away, but his legs wouldn't move. He was bound to this place, and he knew he would never escape it again. "You made me this," Emily's distorted voice echoed once more. "Now you're with me, forever." Her words hit him like a knife, slicing through what little strength he had left. He knew she was right. He had turned her into something that could never again be touched by life. He had imprisoned her in wax, in death, in his own obsession. And now, he was trapped with her. Trapped in that space between the living and the dead, between reality and illusion. The house began to tremble slightly, a low noise coming from the walls, as if they were breathing, stretching, and contracting. James looked at the shadows around him, watching as they twisted and warped grotesquely, as if something was trying to emerge from them. A growing terror welled inside him, as though the house itself was trying to swallow him whole. As though he was being consumed by the darkness. "You can't escape," the craftsman said, his voice sounding even more distant now, as if coming from somewhere far beyond the room. "You can't escape your own creation, James, and neither can I." James turned, his eyes frantically searching for a way out, but everything around him was disintegrating. The floor beneath his feet had become unstable, cracks forming and spreading like veins, as though the house were collapsing. The pressure of fear constricted his throat, and his thoughts began to blur. "You never understood," the craftsman continued, his voice now softer, but laced with a cruelty that weighed on every word. "You thought you could fix your mistakes with wax, but mistakes can't be molded, James. They take root. And now, you're inside them. This is forever. You'll see." Panic overtook James. He no longer knew where he was, if he was still in the house, or trapped inside his own mind. He looked at Emily, but she no longer resembled the wife he had lost. She was a distorted reflection, something beyond his control. A shadow he had summoned, and that now consumed him. He started to run, without direction, yet always feeling drawn toward a central point, like the house was building a path, an invisible trail he couldn't resist. His legs were heavy, his muscles refusing to respond. He tried to scream, but his voice was muffled, like the air itself was pressing against his lungs. The house was alive, and he knew there was no escape. He was trapped inside his own obsession. As he ran, he saw something that froze him in place. In the center of the room, where before there had only been emptiness, stood the wax figure of Emily, only now she was different. She stood tall, her eyes locked on his, and her arms were outstretched, as if reaching for him. Was she alive? No, that wasn't possible. But what else could she be? He couldn't understand. "You killed her, James," she whispered, her voice low and icy. "You killed what I was. Now you're mine. You've always been mine." Her words sliced through his heart like a sharpened blade. He tried to step back, but the sensation that everything around him was collapsing pushed in harder. He no longer understood what was happening to him. He no longer knew who he was. All he knew was that he was being consumed by what he had created by the fear that had led him here. The house continued to twist and distort, its walls shrinking and expanding, creating a choking sensation. The shadows took shape, figures he never imagined to be real appearing, watching him, waiting. Emily's voice continued to echo, now louder, more piercing. James, and now you're going to lose me again. James didn't know what else to do. He clung to the last fragment of sanity left inside him, but it was useless. He was trapped in his own obsession, in a prison of his own making. He didn't know if the house was real, or if all of it was happening inside his head. But he knew one thing for certain. There was no hope left. He wasn't just physically trapped. He was emotionally and spiritually imprisoned. He was lost. "I can't live without you, Emily," he whispered, but his words were drowned in the growing darkness. "I can't." The shadows closed in around him, and all that remained was a stifled scream. The void swallowed him, and then silence. James knew this wasn't the end, just a new form of prison. A cycle destined to repeat forever, bound by his own creation. No rest, no escape. He would never be free again. Darkness was no longer just the absence of light. It was the presence of something immense and oppressive, taking form as it devoured everything around it. James felt it with every fiber of his being, the sensation of drowning, not in water, but in a dark, pulsing mass that seemed to live, to breathe, to feed on him. He was no longer in control of his own body, nor of his thoughts. Reality had dissolved, and all that remained was a vortex of fear and obsession, where he no longer knew what was him, and what was the thing he had created. The images began to distort again. He saw Emily's figure once more, but now she was unrecognizable. Not the wife he had loved, not the wax doll. She was broken, pieces of wax falling from her body, as if she were disintegrating right before his eyes. Her eyes were locked onto his, and within that gaze was a void so deep, it seemed to consume the very space around her. James tried to speak, but the words were stuck, as if some invisible force was keeping him silent. He was being pushed back, as if the house itself were pulling away from him, crumbling slowly, but with such terrifying violence that he could barely comprehend it. He looked around for an escape, but all he saw was darkness closing in. "You can't run from me, James." Emily's voice echoed around him, cold and distant, yet filled with so much rage and pain that it made his heart race. "You did this to me, and now you will pay forever." Terror paralyzed him, but he could no longer ignore what was happening. He wasn't in control. He never had been. He had been consumed by his own obsession, and now there was nothing left for him to do. There was no more Emily. There was nothing human left in what he had created. Only darkness and the crushing feeling of being trapped, with no way out, in an eternal cycle of regret. I only wanted to protect you," James whispered, his voice broken with pain. He was begging, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. He knew it was too late. There was no path back. The shadows around him began to twist their forms, distorting even further, melting into a shapeless mass. James tried to back away, but the darkness enveloped him, pressing in, pushing him toward the center of the void. He was being crushed, not physically, but emotionally. He was being pulled into a place where time, space, and life no longer existed. He could no longer tell where the house ended, and his own mind began. "You killed me," Emily's voice repeated, now louder, closer, as if it were inside his head. "You killed me before you ever transformed me, and now we're both dead." The truth of her words pierced his heart like a dagger. He was lost. He had lost himself in her, in his obsession. He hadn't protected her. He had destroyed her. He had destroyed everything. And now he was trapped in a nightmare from which he would never awaken. Darkness wrapped itself around him completely, as if swallowing what was left of his soul. He felt Emily's presence there, but she was no longer the woman he had loved. She was a creation of his own twisted mind, and now he could no longer escape her. He was inside her. She was inside him. He had created his own prison, and now she was consuming him, slowly but relentlessly. The weight of guilt crushed him until it became unbearable. He fell to his knees, unable to resist the pressure of the darkness pressing in on him. Voices began to blend together, all speaking at once, all suppressing his remaining humanity. The craftsman, Emily, himself, the wax, the house, all of it fused into a single scream of despair. "You'll stay here, James," Emily's voice said, and he no longer knew if it was real or a figment of his mind. Forever. And when he could no longer tell where he ended and where she began, when the darkness swallowed him completely, knew he was lost. But then, something strange happened. The darkness around him began to lift, slowly. He felt as though he were floating pain, it all began to dissolve. The feeling of being trapped was gone, and he felt free. But that didn't mean he had escaped. "You can't get rid of me, James," Emily's voice whispered once more. But this time, it was different. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder, a warning. And deep in his soul, James knew the story would never end. Because it wasn't just him who was trapped. It was the very essence of what he had done. And that, more than anything else, would be the true prison. The sudden calm that enveloped James was more disturbing than any scream or shadow. The silence, it wasn't a relief. It was a sentence. He was floating, or at least, that's how it felt, within a space that was neither dark nor light. A foggy limbo, too white to be comforting, and lacking any form or edges. The world around him felt like moldy cotton, and the air had the bitter taste of melted wax. He couldn't feel his body, and somehow, that was worse than the pain that had once consumed him. For a few moments, James thought he was dead. Truly dead, that it was all over. But the human mind has a cruel way of keeping consciousness alive, even in hell. And then, he heard it. A ticking dot, faint, distant, but steady. He tried to make sense of the sound, to track it, but there was no direction. It was as if it came from inside his own head, or from his heart, like a clock buried in his chest, marking the seconds of an imposed eternity. With every tick, a fleeting image flashed in his mind. Emily smiling on their wedding night. Emily at the window, holding a cup of tea. Emily turning her head slowly, looking at him. With empty eyes, the memories were blurred, as if the wax had seeped into his very thoughts. Then, the fog began to clear, and he was back, but not in the house, not in the office. Not that place. James stood in a hall. Wide, bright, icy. The floor was white polished marble that reflected a distorted version of himself. Tall stained glass windows lined both sides, painted with scenes, disturbing scenes. He couldn't be sure, but one clearly depicted a woman being sculpted into a statue. In another, a hand tore out a still beating heart and dropped it into a cauldron of wax. The vibrant colors clashed with the deadly chill of the air. At the center of the hall stood a pedestal, and upon it, a sculpture. Not of marble, not of wax. James approached, his footsteps echoing like hammer blows. The sculpture was covered by a gray cloth, but he already knew. Deep down, he had always known. Emily. It was her. It was always her. He reached out, hesitant. The cloth was heavy, almost sticky. When he pulled it back, the air seemed to vanish from the room. The figure before him was perfect Emily, every detail intact, except for her eyes. They weren't empty holes, nor glass. They were mirrors, and what James saw reflected in them made him stumble backward. It wasn't his face, it was hers. Inside, him, screaming, begging, preserved, yes, but conscious. "I told you some prisons have no walls," the craftsman's voice echoed from above, as if the stained glass itself had spoken. "You wanted eternity, James. Now see what eternity without a soul costs." He fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face, but before they touched the ground, they turned to wax. He tried to speak to the statue, to plead, but Emily's mirrored eyes reflected what he truly was. A man who had sacrificed the freedom of the one he loved out of fear of being alone. And the hall began to shrink. The walls curved inward. The stained glass cracked slowly. The floor trembled. But James couldn't move. His legs were stiff. His arms ached. He looked at his hands. Wax. The process had begun. He screamed, but no sound came out. His lungs felt like they were melting. The curse was simple. Those who mold love into control mold themselves into their own prison. He would be the next statue. The next example. And before the light vanished entirely, he saw them. Other statues. Dozens. Hundreds. All of them men, women, children. Each frozen in terror, in agony. Each trapped in perfect forms, preserved by their own sins, obsession, ego, fear. The hall of the condemned. And in the back, seated upon a throne made of burned down candles. The craftsman, he was smiling, but his eyes were stitched shut with melted wax. "Welcome to eternity, James." The last words he heard before losing consciousness, or perhaps his humanity. Only one question remained. How many others would do the same? When consciousness returned, if it had ever truly left, James was no longer in the hall. Not that he had walked away. very house where it had all begun, but distorted. The rooms were all there, but angled impossibly. The walls leaned like warped mirrors, and the furniture looked like it was made of flesh and wood, pulsing softly with a deep, wet sound like the inside of a heart. James was standing, but his body felt heavy, numbed, as if he were wearing a mask of himself. His hands no longer had their old firmness. They were soft, smooth, almost translucent. When he touched his own face, he felt the stiffness. Wax. The process was slow, cruelly slow, and conscious. Every movement came with the faint sound of a candle cracking. He tried to run, but the floor was too soft, like walking over layers of skin. The hallway looked the same as before, the dim lamp at the end, the stained burgundy carpet, the office door slightly ajar. But something terrified him more than any of that. The absence of sound, no wind, no echo, not even the sound of his own breath, until he heard it. A cry, faint, repetitive, echoing like a muffled whisper behind a wall. James followed the sound, step by step, the stiffness in his legs growing worse with each moment. The crying came from the bedroom, the room where Emily used to sleep, where he had once laid beside her, counting the beats of her heart, like each one was a promise that she was still there. When he pushed the door open, he saw her. Emily sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to him. Her hair fell in dark waves to her shoulders, and she wore the pale blue robe she had always loved. Her hands covered her face, shoulders shaking with sobs. But something was wrong. The sound wasn't hers. It was more childlike, like the weeping of a porcelain doll, metallic, soulless, hollow. James wanted to back away, but his body pushed forward, as if each step was being forced by some old guilt that wouldn't let him rest. He reached out a hand. Emily? She stopped crying instantly. The silence fell like a trapdoor. She didn't turn, but her head began to rotate. Not her shoulders, just the head. It turned slowly, creaking, until her face was completely facing backward. It wasn't Emily's face. It was his. No, worse. It was his face in wax, with gouged eyes and the frozen smile of someone who had just accepted that he had lost everything. James stumbled back, but the door behind him was gone. There was no exit. The walls of the room began to drip molten wax, and the carpet now stuck to his feet, pulling him with every step. Why didn't you let me go? The figure asked. The voice didn't come from its mouth. It came from inside. Its head, like a buzzworm burrowing into the ear. I loved you? I didn't want to lose you. James tried to say, but his voice came out muffled, as if spoken behind thick glass. The figure rose. Its movements were slow, mechanical, but filled with something else. Something that hurt just to witness. Its joints cracked like splitting wax, and each step left marks on the floor, as if it were melting as it approached. You wanted to keep me, but you forgot that love can't be molded. It burns. She raised her hand. The touch of her fingers was like frozen fire. Wherever she touched, James's skin hardened. One shoulder, then his arm, his neck. He didn't scream anymore. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. And then she leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Now we are one." And that's when he saw. For the first time, he saw himself inside the statue, not from the outside. From within, the heart beat in wax, ticking like an old clock about to stop. And in the reflection of the bedroom window, where he once saw the world, he now saw a display case. As if the entire house was, in fact, part of a museum. A museum of perfect figures, where no one ages. Where no one leaves, where everyone smiles forever. The bedroom door creaked open by itself. On the other side, a sign hung. CURSIVE lettering, carved by hand. The Wax Wife, Unsolved Case, Pennsylvania. New light flickered in the distance. A new room, a new space waiting to be filled. And James was already ready. I no longer know how long I've been here. There are no windows, no clocks, no days or nights. Only this constant pale glow, dripping from the walls like a sickly moonlight. A light that comes from nowhere. It just is, as if the space around me has grown used to my presence. As if now we are part of each other. You must be wondering, where exactly is he now? The answer? In the exhibit. That's right. That display case. It wasn't just a vision. It was a transition. A slow, calculated revelation. The endless corridor. The nameplates. The eyes of visitors. past me every day. Curious tourists, occult enthusiasts, teenagers laughing with phones in hand, all staring at the wax husband, as the little plaque at my feet says. They think I'm a work of art, a genius creation, a made-up story designed to capture attention. But I'm here, inside, trapped, awake, feeling everything. What hurts the most, beyond the complete stillness, is the sound or the absence of it. You never realize how comforting the noise of your own body is, your breath, your heartbeat, even the creak of your joints, until it's gone. And yet, I still hear things. Emily. Sometimes just a whisper. Other times, a deep wail from within the wall. And on the worst days, when the gallery lights flicker like they're tired of shining, I hear the footsteps of the artisan. He comes. He always comes. With gloved hands, he walks the halls like a curator in his private gallery. The sound of boots on marble is rhythmic, ceremonial. He stops in front of me, says nothing, watches. Sometimes he murmurs something incomprehensible, in a language that doesn't seem human. And then he smiles. A crooked smile, unfinished, like a sculpture abandoned halfway through. He's the one who brought me here. He's the one who offered me eternity in exchange for love. Love molded, manufactured, solidified. The saddest part? For a time, I believed he was right. The exhibit, it seems, exists outside of time, or beyond it. And I'm not the only one. There are others. I see them. To my left, a young woman with swollen eyes, forever shedding a tear of wax. Her hand is outstretched, as if waiting for an apology that will never come. They say she preserved her own child, forever, until the boy's soul screamed from inside the figure for 7 days, before falling silent. To my right, an old man with a frozen smile. A preacher, I think, from what I read. He preached eternal life and decided to create his own preserved congregation of followers. We're all here, and we're all guilty. The exhibit moves, always, never stays in one place for long. The walls shift, the setting adjusts to the newest tale. A small town in Pennsylvania. Today, yes, tomorrow, maybe another curious village needing a fresh urban legend to scare their children. But one thing never changes. The central hall. That's where Emily is. She's not like she once was. Her figure is celebrated now. The wax wife. Centerpiece. Golden lighting. People line up to see her. They take pictures. Comment on the delicate detail. So lifelike, they say. It's like she's about to breathe. They don't know she still breathes. I can feel her. Sometimes. I hear her breath the moment someone says my name. This one was made by the husband, right? He preserved her after she died. Died? If only that were true. Emily is here, like me. Only quieter. She doesn't look at me anymore. And maybe, deep down, I deserve that silence. But once, just once, her eyes moved. Just a millimeter. And I knew. She's waiting. Not for me, but for something that's coming. Something that, even here, inside this casing of wax and horror, still frightens me. The artisan is waiting too. The whole exhibit is preparing. With every new visitor, every retelling, every share online. They grow. Not in number, in presence. In reach. And now I wonder, are you over there, on the other side of the screen, listening to my story, wondering if it's real or just fiction? Can you smell it? Yes, that melting wax. Faint, warm, like the end of a candle's flame, because the exhibit is getting close. Maybe to your town, maybe to your street, maybe to the back of your mind, where stories hide until they take form. After all, how many unresolved loves live inside you? How many silences have you shoved under your memory? How many times have you wished someone would never leave you? Maybe, just maybe, the artisan is listening. And he always listens. Form is eternal, but guilt lives. If you're hearing this now, it's because the artisan allowed it. He let some voices pass through. But never fully. He wants the story to spread, you see, because every person who listens, who believes, who feels a chill crawl down their spine, feeds what's on the other side, feeds the wax, gives it shape, and I feel it. Every night someone wakes up from a strange dream, sweating, convinced they saw something standing in the dark corner of their room. Something too still, too silent. I know. I sense it. The energy builds. The room I'm in trembles. The eyes of the other figures open, for a second, a millisecond. But I don't sleep. I never sleep. And maybe, that's the worst part. Think you're tired after missing a night's rest? Try not sleeping for who knows how many ETERNITI. E's. Time here is elastic. No one ages. But the mind, it rots, slowly, like fruit forgotten in a bowl too beautiful to touch. Sometimes when the visitors leave, I hear the statues speak to each other. It's a dull sound, like old wood creaking. Some whisper, others just scream silently. Each one is stuck in their own loop, a never-ending replay of the she moment that trapped them here. As if even in wax, the pain is etched deep, and you're probably thinking, this is a nightmare. But it's not. It's much, much worse. Nightmares end when you wake up. Here, you never wake up. Want to know something ironic? On the main wall of the exhibit, there's a sign. Old golden letters, lacquered finish. A kind of welcome message. It reads, immortalize what you love. Just don't complain about the result. The artisan put it there as a reminder. Or maybe a warning. But no one reads it. Or if they do, they think it's beautiful. Poetic. Like some metaphor for eternal love. It's funny. Humans have this habit of romanticizing, but they don't understand. Turning horror into art when they can't face it. And that's exactly what I did with Emily. I turned love into a prison. I romanticized the idea of eternity until it became grotesque. I thought I was doing it for love. But it was ego. Fear. Have you ever feared losing someone so much that you wished you could bottle time? I did. And now I'm here. Bottled with it. Preserved. The artisan walks the halls every night. Sometimes he talks to himself. Sometimes he adjusts us, changes our clothes, restores details, wipes imaginary smudges. A perfectionist, but not out of vanity, out of obsession. He says he's preparing the final piece. He never explains what it is, but every time he says it, the room shakes, the lights flicker, the figures sigh. And I feel it. Whatever the final piece is, it's coming. And no, it won't be just another sculpture. It will be a ritual, a turning point. The exhibit will become something greater. No longer static, no longer silent. The last time the artisan spoke to me, and it was recent, he leaned close to my ear. And I swear I felt his breath. Warm, real, like flesh. He said, you will speak for me. When your voice reaches 100,000 ears. I opened the gate. I didn't understand at first. But now I do. These audios, these words, this story you're hearing right now. It's single quotes S, not just confession. It's the key. Every time someone listens, shares, comments, repeats this story, the number rises. You helped, even if you didn't mean to. Even if you thought this was just another creepy internet tale. And when that number is reached, when the audience is big, enough. E comes. And the exhibit will no longer be a place. It will become a presence. It will live in houses, in schools, in offices, in phones, in dreams. And the figures? They will move. Maybe you'll see one in your living room. A statue, beautiful, but with one detail too wrong to ignore. An extra finger. Eyes that follow. Or a whisper from where no one stands. And you'll try to brush it off. You'll laugh. You'll mention it to someone. I dreamed about that wax wife story. But deep down, you'll know, she's close, I'm close, and the artisan, he's smiling. He only needed one more soul to listen, just one more. Could it be yours? Are you still there? Still listening? Maybe you think you're in control, that you can pause this story whenever you want, that all it takes is closing the tab, turning down the volume, shutting off your phone, and that's it. The end. But let me tell you a secret. After the 1,000th soul listened, something changed. What you're hearing now isn't just sound. It's an invitation. And you've already accepted. The exhibit hall grew. I heard the footsteps multiply. The echo deepened. And as impossible as it may seem, there are new corridors now. Corridors that didn't exist before. Corridors with doors marked by names the artisan never spoke aloud. But ones he whispers in the dark. He knows yours. Yes, yours. The names appear engraved, as if the walls themselves are murmuring, you're next. And I'm still here, aware, trapped. But now, something is different. I feel movement. Before, what surrounded me was silence. Now, there's unrest, voices, whispers coming from within the other figures. They are waking up. The statues that once wept in silence now murmur memories. sister laughs, but the laugh is dry, like leaves scraping glass, and Emily. Well, Emily doesn't speak. She just watches, and that alone is enough. Her eyes are no longer wax or glass. They're liquid mirrors. In them, I see the corridors multiplying. I see cities cloaked in display cases, people turned into decorative pieces, entire lives converted into adorned silence. But I see something else. See you. Yes, you. Standing in front of a mirror, with skin just a shade too pale, with eyes that linger motionless for 1 second too long. Maybe you've already felt it. That chill that didn't come with any breeze. That sensation of being watched while completely alone. The whisper you assumed was just in your head. It's only the beginning. The artisan's final piece isn't a sculpture. It's a pact. He offered me something just recently. Whispered it in that voice like dripping wax. James, he said, you'll be the link, the bridge, the statue's mouth. You will speak for us. And I asked, out of instinct. And then, he didn't answer, just smiled. That crooked smile, the kind that looks like it'll crack. But I understood. Then, I won't be the only one anymore. I'll be the first of many. Other Jameses will come. Others afraid of losing someone. Others ready to make the same mistakes. Others willing to trade freedom for eternal presence. You've seen it, haven't you? Couples glued together, suffocating, calling it love while they hold each other hostage. Parents who control their children like porcelain dolls, afraid the world will break them. People clinging to dead relationships with both hands, simply because they can't face the emptiness. The artisan doesn't mold wax. He molds attachment. And you think you're immune? Do you really? Maybe there's already someone you hold too tightly. Or maybe you're the one being held. And the wax? It begins with a touch. Hey, stay a little longer. And I can't live without you. Until it becomes, you'll never leave. Again. And when you least expect it, you'll be cold inside. Eternal. Beautiful. But soulless. Just like me. So, please? Listen closely. Don't love the way I loved. Don't confuse fear with affection. Don't think that keeping someone is the same as caring for them. Because wax might preserve ... But it erases too. It erases who they were. It erases who you are. And after that, all that's left is a display case. And a curious crowd. And a plaque. With your name. And the constant whisper. It almost looks alive. I've lost count of how many have come to see my face. They lean in, whisper, point. Some laugh. Others murmur. How sad. As if they understand any part of what happened. But no one understands. No one really listens. Because it's not just a statue standing there. It's a prison. A frozen confession. And if you think this is the end, and everything is resolved now, it's because you haven't seen the back room yet. The back room. It's not open to the public. It's protected. Locked with a key that doesn't have teeth, but memory. And only those who've carried enough weight in their soul can pass through. I made it, not by merit, but by punishment. The room is dark, darker than any corner of the exhibit. But when you enter, you begin to see, not with your eyes, with something else. A kind of sensitivity that only develops after your sanity has been peeled away, layer by layer. Inside are the drafts. Yes, drafts. The artisan doesn't get it right on the first try. He tries, he fails, and when he fails, he doesn't destroy. He keeps them. The figures there aren't complete. Some have no faces. Others are half human, half made of something that looks like wax, but pulses. Some still move, slowly, as if trying to remember what it's like to be human. And all of them whisper names. Some you'd recognize. Others, you'll hear someday. I saw a figure that looked like a child. It had glass eyes and fingers stitched together with nylon thread. It walked back and forth, like it was playing. But its feet dragged a red trail across the floor. And every time it looked at me, I wanted to forget my name. There, in that room, I understood. The final piece isn't a figure. It's a fusion. The artisan wants to merge everything he's made. All the statues, all the stories, all the names, all the guilt into one being. A universal mold. A you that contains all of us. And he's almost finished. Just one thing is missing. Someone willing, not innocent, not pure, not special. Just willing. Willing to save someone at any cost. Willing to blur the line between love and possession. step through the door, knowing it never opens back the other way. And I wonder, how many of you have come close to that? How many have said, I can't live without you? How many have thought, if only I could freeze this moment forever? Because that's how it begins. With a wish, a thought. And then the artisan appears. Not how you expect. Sometimes as an antique dealer, a doll restorer, a museum worker, a master of taxidermy. He doesn't force, he suggests. And when you accept, even out of curiosity, you move closer to the mold. You start to feel it. The stiffness in your joints, the sensation of being watched when no one's around, the scent of wax, where there are no candles. And then, one night, you dream of it, the display case, with you inside, and everyone who's gone through it says the same. The first sign is always the wrong reflection in the mirror. You smile, but your reflection doesn't follow. Your head turns, half a second late, and the eyes, they don't blink. Because the mold has begun. And once it starts, it only stops for two reasons. Either you escape the love that binds you, or you accept becoming part of the piece. I accepted. Emily was dragged with me. And now, I wait. Maybe for you. Because the artisan says the final piece needs one human gaze. Just one. One that feels compassion. That sees the exhibit, and sheds a tear. A real one. That tear is the final drop. The one that hardens the final mold. He calls it the morning wax. And when it falls, the exhibit will no longer be a story told in videos, whispers, and obscure forms. It will exist everywhere. On your walls, in the reflection on your phone screen, in the scent you don't recognize on your pillow, or in the feeling that someone is standing behind your door, silent, just watching. Waiting. I wonder sometimes if I'm even still capable of wondering how it would have been if I had just let Emily go. I had accepted that true love doesn't need to be eternal to be real, that the beauty of life lies in its impermanence, in the way it slips through your fingers like hot wax, and that's okay. That's what gives it value. To burn until the end, not to freeze, but I'm no longer me. Not really. Now I'm just a piece, one more among many, still conscious, still trapped. And now, something tells me the artisan has finished the mold. He walks faster through the halls now. His steps are no longer steady, but heavy, urgent. The whispers from the figures have grown louder. The walls hum with a frequency that makes the wax tremble. And the central room? It's being sealed. Not from the public. From us. The artisan enters and locks everything. He stays in there for hours. Sometimes days. Alone with her. With Emily. The centerpiece. The core. The origin. When the door opens, something different lingers in the air. It's not just the scent of melted wax. It's a strange, thick heat, as if the room is alive, breathing. And with each breath, it pulls a little more from whoever is watching. I no longer see her the same way. Now, Emily is seated. Her head gently bowed forward, eyes closed, hands resting on her lap, as if waiting for someone. The light above her is golden, but it doesn't shine. It pulses, and the artisan? He started speaking to me again. Last night, he whispered, it's time to tell the end. And that's why I'm here, whispering this to you now. You made it this far. You walked through this story. You felt every crack, every step of my descent. And now I need you to know, the end is not the end. The final piece already has shape. It is complete. And your name, yes, yours, has been carved. The final room is ready. The mirror has been hung. The candle lit. And you, without even realizing it, opened the door. It doesn't matter if you're at home, in the car, in the dark of your room, with your phone in hand. What matters is that you listened until the end. And that was the last requirement. The artisan thanks you. The wax already knows the way. It drips where it's needed, touches where something is missing, molds what is incomplete. You'll start to feel it in the coming nights. Stiffness in your fingers, a thick silence in the air, a shadow at the foot of your bed, still like a sculpture, but shifting places each day. Don't speak to it. Don't stare too long. Don't try to break the mold, or you'll speed up the process. And if you manage to resist long enough, maybe, just maybe, you'll make it out unharmed. But most become stories. Just like I did. Just like so many have. And if tomorrow you wake up and don't quite remember your reflection, if your hands feel cold, if your voice takes longer to come out, run. Because when the artisan comes for you, he doesn't Congratulations, you've reached the end of the story. But tell me, do you feel it now? That sensation? That there's something right behind you? Don't. Turn around. Don't take a deep breath. Just turn off the light. And wait, because in the end, there's only one certainty. The world we see might not be all that exists. Comment below what you think. And if you're brave enough, come back tomorrow. There's always another story waiting for you. But remember, some stories never end.